In his final public statement, a self-styled martyr quotes verses from the Quran.
Indeed, Allah has purchased the wealth and souls of the believers in exchange for paradise. They fight in His cause, they kill and are killed, and that is the highest success. O you who believe, fight those who fight you.
I don't see Quran connected to killing. I don't see Quran connected to taking up lives. Quran is about existence, about tolerance, about mercy.
The main objective of the Sharia is forgiveness. Is to be forgiven, is not just to judge and to kill.
I believe that Islam's law of retaliation in kind for murderers is one of the most beautiful laws of the Quran. If we want to choose only one good law from the Quran, it's that one.
So many different voices come out of the Quran. Moderate people have their support in the verses of the Quran. Radical people have the same thing with different verses in the Quran.
The Quran honors women. The Quran dignifies women. I feel that as a woman every day.
It is my personal belief that I am not required to wear the hijab.
The Quran is being called the most ideologically influential text in the world, yet there are widely different interpretations. What does the Quran actually say? And how much do Muslims and non-Muslims alike really understand about the message and the history of the Quran? It's hard to imagine another time when this was such an urgent question. Orthodox Muslims believe that the Quran in its original Arabic is the perfect, timeless and unchanging word of God as first revealed to the Prophet Muhammad by the angel Gabriel in a cave in the Arabian desert nearly 1,500 years ago. God's message, according to Muslim belief, was transmitted bit by bit over a 23-year period until the death of the Prophet in the year 632. Muhammad, according to tradition, was illiterate, but his memory flawless. After each encounter with the archangel, he would repeat God's message to relatives and close friends who wrote it down on skins, palm leaves, anything that came to hand. Some 20 years after his death, these scraps were brought together in the first complete and written version of the Quran. To hear it recited is, for most Muslims, to experience the power of divine revelation as a shattering voice from the unseen.
This is God's word. God is present. God is there talking to you.
It feels that God is talking to me, to Lena, living in Cairo in 2007. Just like he was talking to Muhammad, living in Mecca.
It's talking to me, not to my intellect. It's talking to my body, it's talking to my heart.
It's a miracle from God. It's no ordinary book, for many reasons. One is the sheer majesty of the language. It's a very beautiful linguistic form. Sometimes it makes me cry.
I am in front of God. I am with Him. We are alone. He looks upon me. He can hear me. He speaks to me through the words of the Quran.
Muslims believe the Quran to be God's final revelation to mankind. It runs to just over 6,000 verses, roughly a fifth of the number in the Bible. But unlike the Bible, there's no obvious chronology. It's a series of revelations within a complex narrative structure.
It's not a history book. It's not a moralizing book. It's not a sermon. It's not a text of science. It's itself. There's no other text before or since that is remotely comparable to it.
It gives you parameters, and it leaves your intelligence and your own judgment to derive the details. So it's a book of guidelines.
Today, Islam is a religion of vast dimensions. Well over 1 billion people, from the Americas to China, from Finland to the southern tip of Africa, are Muslim. Yet within this single universe of belief, there are profound differences in the status of women, in attitudes to peace and violence, punishment and forgiveness. Some Muslim regimes deny girls the right to an education and women the right to vote or drive. In some countries, women scuttle through the rear doors of segregated buses. In other Muslim countries, women lead political parties and even become heads of state. In a few Muslim countries, executions by stoning, hanging, and beheading are carried out in public. In others, the death penalty has been abolished altogether. There are also striking differences in forms of worship and belief. At this mosque in the Iranian city of Qom, young men invoke the name of Imam Ali, the martyred son-in-law of the Prophet, who, they believe, receives their prayers and intercedes with God on their behalf. Other Muslims dismiss such practices as saint worship and blasphemy. In this Turkish mosque, the same Imam Ali, martyred founder of the Shia community, looks down on devotees who spread a message of peace and harmony between all those, Christian, Muslim, and Jew, who share a belief in one God. Here, men and women worship side by side and express their devotion in song and sometimes even in dance. Other followers of the same Quran consider this form of worship and the pictorial representation of Ali sacrilege. In this mosque, on the other side of the same city, men only pray with men. The opposite sex is considered a distraction, so women are screened from view. In some mosques, they are entirely excluded. But if Islam is firmly rooted in the Quran, and the Quran is the ultimate and changeless message of God, how are these differences possible? The most striking contrast is in the role and status of women, symbolized by the different rules governing the wearing of the veil. This Egyptian family believes that from the age of 3, all girls should wear the hijab, which covers the throat and neck. Once they reach puberty, the full niqab, which leaves only the eyes exposed.
My husband encouraged me to conceal my body to please God and to please him as well, because he will be judged for my actions. So I did as he wished.
Because everything about a woman is seductive, God wants her to be completely covered by the niqab. If that's God's will, it's also my will.
A Cairo nightclub just a few miles away. No veils required here. Men and women mixing freely, and everything here perfectly permissible within the laws of this Muslim country. But even the women here would cover up before venturing into the streets outside. There's no law that requires it, but a powerful consensus that women should be veiled. In other parts of the Muslim world, the veil is obligatory. The women here in Iran are uniformly dressed in chadors, which cover their hair and all their outer clothing, leaving only the face and hands exposed. Every Saudi Arabian woman is required by law to be fully covered, including hands and face. While in Muslim Turkey, wearing the veil at all is a contentious issue, and the ground rules are changing all the time.
When I walk down the streets of Cairo unveiled, I do feel a certain pressure. I don't look like everyone else. It attracts attention, and some of it is negative. 3 decades ago, the hijab did not exist in Egypt. Up until 1974, I had not seen a single veiled woman. If you look at the Nasser funeral in September 1970, 7 million Egyptian men and women were on the streets of Cairo. You will not spot one veiled woman.
Nasser's funeral was a turning point. For 16 years, this charismatic Egyptian leader bestrode the world stage, inspiring Arabs everywhere with his vision of a united, secular Arab superstate. But the hope he had inspired in so many Arab hearts was dashed by economic failure and crushing defeat at the hands of the Israelis in 1967. In a sense, the millions who wept at his funeral were not only mourning the passing of a once great leader, but the death of a dream, a secular dream.
Suddenly, we did not have much to hang on to. We had to find something else. And many young people who were born in the 70s were the first to run for the religious identity.
So what does the Quran say about the woman's obligation to wear the veil?
Tell the female believers to restrain their eyes and guard their virginity, and not display their adornment, except for what is apparent, and draw their veils over their cleavage, and to not display their beauty.
How does one of the highest Muslim authorities in the world interpret the phrase, not to display their adornment except that which is apparent?
ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا ما ظهر منها.
Most clerics agree that which is apparent means the hands and the face.
The men of religion had wives and daughters who were not in the hijab until the 70s. So have they suddenly realized that it is required?
And that's not the only paradox. Other scholars interpret the same verse in the Quran as a clear injunction that a woman should be completely covered.
The Quran has clearly stipulated women's dress code in Surah Al-Nur. It states that the face, eyes, lips, and womanly beauty are their adornments. If the veil is worn, it must cover the face and hide the beauty.
Their face should not be covered. It is not an Islamic duty. It is not a Quranic injunction. It predates Islam and predates Prophet Muhammad's own life. It was a normal Bedouin custom of the society. So in a nutshell, Muslim women are to cover whole of their body except their face and their hands.
I have read the Quran many times. I have read the Hadith. I have read interpretations of the Quran, and it is my personal belief that I am not required to wear the hijab. And 15 years ago, I could have engaged in a discussion with men of religion over that. Today, it is almost impossible to engage in a discussion of that detail. If you say that, it is blasphemous.
7 a.m. in their Cairo apartment. Anan Kamal and her husband Mustafa are getting their children ready for school. In one sense, this is everyday reality. In another, it is not. The presence of a film crew forces Hanan to wear the niqab, as she now believes she must in front of any male outside her immediate family. Until her engagement to Mustafa, who works as a chauffeur, Hanan was a practicing lawyer. Once married, she gave up her practice, assumed the niqab, and dedicated herself to raising a family and maintaining the home. She says that Mustafa had no influence on the decision. It was God who called her to wear the niqab.
Humans don't control what happens to them. It is God who directs us.
Has Allah rewarded you for your devotion?
Yes, definitely, thanks be to God. I was quite nervous about taking this step. I felt the niqab would be a restriction on me. I was really taking this step with fear. I felt I might relapse at any time. But with God's help, it was probably the time I felt most relaxed and comfortable in my home, with my husband and children. Once I put on the niqab, I came closer to God.
You gave up a good career to be a homemaker and wear the niqab. Wasn't that a huge financial sacrifice as well as a personal sacrifice?
Anyone who gives to God is fully compensated. I didn't feel any loss at all. On the contrary, my husband got a better job and my life became so much better when I dedicated myself to my children and my husband, and of course deepened my relationship with God.
The veil is a complex symbol with many meanings for Muslim women. To those like Hanan who choose to wear the niqab, it signals her dedication to God and husband, even as she withdraws from the world. Other women wear the veil as an empowering statement of who they are.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm a very proud Muslim woman. I'm proud of my identity. I'm proud of my veil. I'm proud of what it stands for.
Lina Fauzi runs a training program in rural Egypt. A university graduate who's traveled widely, she's clearly accepted as a figure of authority by this largely male group. 5 years ago, at the age of 26, Lina was divorced. Almost immediately, she decided to wear the hijab.
I remember the first time I went out wearing the veil, and I remember feeling this is how God wants to honor a woman. This is the respect a woman demands by wearing the veil. And I felt very dignified and very honored by it.
Since her divorce, Lina has gone back to live with her parents. Her closest friends are young women like herself, university graduates, privileged, widely traveled, and sharing her beliefs and practices.
That's a very Egyptian-specific.
To many in her parents' generation, this whole trend is baffling.
Lena did it just one Friday morning like that. I was amazed. Just one Friday morning.
Saturday, actually.
Saturday, was it? Yeah. And she just put on the hijab, came out of her room, and she said, okay, here I am, I'm muhajjaba. To be honest with you, I wasn't very happy. I wasn't very happy at all. Because I don't think that the hair of a woman is something that she has to hide. This is what I believe. Because I feel my hair is like my flesh.
One verse in the Quran says that Muslim women should hide, should not show their natural beauty, natural adornment, except that which appears from it. And there's a whole controversy around that. What appears from it? Is it the face? Is it the hands? Is it the eyes? Is it the hair? And lots of people have said different things about that.
It is not a verse in the Quran. I feel maybe many, Al-Azhar maybe will be mad at me if I say so, but God could have said, cover your hair. It wasn't mentioned. It was mentioned for the wives of the Prophet.
Personally, there's no way I could deny that my hair was part of my natural beauty. In my heart, I felt that that was part of what God had asked me to cover up as a Muslim woman.
Do you feel, are you treated like a second-class citizen in a country like this?
Well, the short answer is no. I question a lot of things, but I feel very, very comfortable accepting that if there's something that I feel is not right with the Quran, then the problem is with my understanding, not with the Quran. Having said that, the Quran is constantly enjoining us to reflect, to question, to understand, to use our mental faculties, to use our heart and understanding.
As you read it, you don't feel the Quran relegates women to an inferior status?
Not at all.
Really?
If there is any disempowerment to women in this part of the world, it's entirely cultural. It's nothing to do with religion. Islam has honored women. Men and women are entirely equal in Islam.
But is that really the message of the Quran? There are a number of verses that seem to define the status of women. Men are the managers of women's affairs in that God has preferred one over the other.
Meaning that the man is financially responsible for the family and supplying all their needs.
Men are a degree above women.
But the woman is equal to the man in everything that touches human feelings. Love, trust, confidence, pride, respect and honor.
Those wives you fear may be rebellious, admonish, banish to their couches and beat them.
الإسلام حينما قال بالضرب في القرآن جعله
Islam says through the Quran that beating is appropriate for a certain type of woman. Not all women.
ليست كل امرأة. المرأة التي
This teaching applies to the woman who disobeys her husband and refuses to live in her house and refuses to raise her children and wants to go out whenever she pleases and wants no one to control her and is unwilling to fulfill her duties.
لا أحد يتحكم فيها ولا تقوم بدورها.
Your wives are land to be tilled, so till your land when and how you will.
أن المرأة ليست متاع.
This is an honoring of women. Women are not the property of a man. They are like the fertile land that a husband takes care of and doesn't exhaust.
Some would argue that it's not an easy task reconciling verses from the Quran with modern notions of equality and human rights. But Dr. Saleh has taken it on. Her weekly TV show, Women's Struggles, is seen by women across the Arab world.
My duty as a broadcaster and an academic is to show the true face of Islam and the correct interpretation of the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet. The issue of the veil, polygamy, divorce, the beating of women, the non-participation of women in political life, depriving the woman of her financial property and private property, forcing women into marriage, in some countries to marry someone she doesn't love because he's from the same tribe. All these are bad practices and are results of traditions and cultures not connected to Islam. These are throwbacks to pre-Islamic times.
Dr. Salah is the first woman dean of Cairo's Al-Azhar University, the most prestigious in the Muslim world. For daring to suggest that the Quran respects men and women equally, she has faced death threats. Yet many Muslims share her views.
If you look at both the letter and the spirit of the Quran, there are innumerable verses that talks about the parity, the egalitarian nature between the genders. For example, in Surah Baqarah, chapter 2, 187, the Quran says, talking about women, they are a garment to you as you are a garment to them.
I think that's the most incredible verse about the relationship between a husband and a wife. The closeness, the warmth that, the clothes provide. Clothes conceal your faults, they beautify you. And that's what the marriage relationship is. You're so close. You can't get a more beautiful image than that. And nobody ever mentions that.
Other interpretations of a woman's role are less beautiful. Pakistan. Women protest honor killing, murder committed by Muslim men who believe their religion requires them to take the life of any female relative who disobeys them by following her heart. Little girls subjected to circumcision. In Egypt, 97% of girls aged 15 to 19 have endured some form of genital mutilation.
Circumcision has existed from the time of the Prophet of God and has been organized by the Prophet himself.
The Quran does not say anything about female genital mutilation. It is a tradition that has unfortunately existed in this country for centuries.
Although there's no endorsement in the Quran, some hardline clerics strongly support the practice.
Circumcision is the reason why Muslim women are virtuous, unlike Western women who run after their sexual appetite in any place with any man. I hope I don't insult or embarrass the English nation, where adultery occurs on a large scale. With circumcision, it would refine, rectify, purify.
It is an African cultural practice predating Islam, and undoubtedly, as far as the ijma, consensus amongst the scholars of the world of today is concerned, it harms a female body, it's mutilating a female body, not allowed.
How does one separate customs that predate Islam from the message of the Quran? Can history throw any light on the present? From the beginning, Islam was firmly rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Jesus is revered in the Quran. This Christian Orthodox convent of Saidinaya was founded in Syria 23 years before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad and has been respected and protected in the heart of the Muslim world for centuries. The convent is dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus. Saidinaya means Our Lady in Aramaic, the language of the whole Middle East at the time of Christ. Arabic is now the language of these Christian devotions. God is Allah, and anyone familiar with the Quran will recognize words and phrases in the sung liturgy. The nuns of Cyrenaica are guardians of a relic so sacred that no one is permitted to see it. Locked away behind a series of silver doors is an icon of Mary holding the infant Jesus. It is said they both sat for the portrait, which was painted by St. Luke. Whatever the truth, Christians and Muslims, like these women, come here to pray to the Madonna for miracles of healing.
I came with my husband here to the church and asked Madonna to give me a baby.
Mary in Islam and the Quran is regarded as the highest and the most chaste and virtuous woman ever. A woman who brought a miracle on the face of this earth, a birth of a baby, even though she was virgin. But of course, God does not need to be the father of the baby. That's the difference in the Islamic narrative.
An entire chapter of the Quran is named after Mary. Abraham, Moses, David, and the prophets of the Torah are also revered, as is Jesus. Though not considered the Son of God, he is mentioned more times by name in the Quran than Muhammad himself.
Jesus is a very revered figure. He is also considered a prophet who brought one of the holy scriptures that we also believe in. In Islam, it's known as Injil. It's now known as, of course, the New Testament.
I believe in Moses and I believe in the Torah. Would that make me a Jew? If I believe in Jesus and the Bible, that make me Christian. And I believe in Muhammad and the Quran, that make me Muslim. Jesus and Moses and Muhammad, they are the same level of prophecy. They are ulil azm. You know, they are mentioned in the Quran as they are messengers from God. So who we are to say this is better than the others and this is right and this is wrong? Lakum dinukum waliya din. You have your religion, I have mine. God says. These are not my words.
And there are many other verses in the same vein. Muslims, Jews, and Christians are described as the people of the book.
Those who are Jews and Christians, their reward is with the Lord.
There is no compulsion in religion.
Other verses warn Muslims not to follow the errant views of Christians and Jews, nor to take them as their friends. Tolerance and intolerance apparently in equal measure. And so it is with messages of peace and violence.
Whoever killeth a human being, it shall be as if he hath killed all mankind. And whosoever saveth the life of one, it shall be as if he'd saved all mankind.
But then in the very next verse,
the only reward of those who make war upon Allah and his messenger and strive after corruption in the land will be that they will be killed or crucified, or have their hands and feet on alternate sides cut off. Such will be their degradation in the world and in the hereafter. Theirs will be an awful doom.
The Quran is like a big store, like a big supermarket. In this book, you are able to pick different answers. You are able to make peace according to the Quran. You are able to declare war according to the Quran. So many different voices come out of the Quran. Moderate people have their support in the verses of the Quran. Radical people have the same thing with different verses in the Quran.
A Quran for peace, a Quran for war, vividly illustrated by Islamic history. First, there was conquest. After Muhammad's death in 632, Arab armies fanned out in all directions. To the north and east, they defeated the armies of Byzantium and Persia, claiming Syria, Palestine, Iran, and Iraq for Islam. To the west, they conquered Egypt and swept across North Africa, reaching the Atlantic coast by the 680s. As the desert warriors defeated these great civilizations, they chose not to raze and destroy, but to learn and build upon what was already there. Some of the greatest Islamic architecture in the world was created less than 80 years after the Prophet's death.
The Quran is the initial detonation that launches one of the most extraordinary civilizational stories of human experience. Within 100 years, the barefoot warriors of Western Arabia were masters of a great, sophisticated, hugely prosperous civilization that stretched from the beaches of Morocco across to the gates of China. And really the force that produced that was this amazing, radioactive, glorious piece of thunder in their hands, which was the Word of God, the uncreated Word of God.
Later, when the Arabs were defeated by successive waves of invaders from the east, something remarkable happened. Such was the power of the Quran that the conquerors abandoned their pagan beliefs and submitted to the faith of the people they had conquered. Fired by this glorious piece of thunder, each new age saw astounding developments in architecture, science, and philosophy, while Europe remained mired in its feudal dark ages.
There's something which is very important in the Quran, which is asking the Muslim, go and just seek for knowledge, look for knowledge, try to understand. So go in the world and try to understand.
The ideas of the ancient Greeks and Romans might never have reached us had it not been for Islamic scholars and scientists who rediscovered, developed, and enriched them. And that stimulus came from the Quran, which in verse after verse calls upon mankind to examine the heavens and the earth, to reflect on creation, to look and look again. As early as the 9th century, Muslim scientists calculated the circumference of the earth, and Muslim merchants established a sea route to China via the southern tip of Africa. Arabic numerals were developed from their Indian origins into the basis of a new arithmetic, and Islamic scholars made a huge contribution to the development of geometry, algebra, and trigonometry. Islamic medicine remains standard practice for 1,000 years. When Muslim society was in the ascendancy, the Quranic call for openness and tolerance encouraged European Jews and dissident Christians to seek the protection of Islam when fleeing persecution in their own countries. But when the Muslim world felt threatened, either by external enemies or internal disruption, the impulse was to close in and take a very different message from the Quran. In the minds of many Muslims, they are now living in such a time. Isfahan, Iran, on Al-Quds Day, Jerusalem Day. All across the Muslim world, crowds are marching in demonstrations like this, some spontaneous, some orchestrated, in protest against what they see as the occupation of their sacred city. But Jerusalem is equally sacred to Jews and Christians. Devout Jews pray at the Western Wall, the last remnant of the Second Temple destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 AD. a date that marks the start of the long night of the Jewish diaspora. On the mount above, two mosques, Al-Aqsa and the Dome on the Rock, built 6 centuries later when the victorious Arabs wrested control of the city from Christian Byzantium. According to biblical tradition, the rock beneath the dome is where Abraham made ready to sacrifice his son Isaac, and according to the Koran, it was also from here that Muhammad ascended into heaven following a night journey from Mecca to Jerusalem.
People must understand, Jerusalem is the 3rd city for us after Mecca and Al-Medina. In the early days, the Prophet and his companions used to face Jerusalem when they prayed, until they received God's instruction through the Quran to face Mecca. God elevated our Prophet from Mecca to Jerusalem and then called him to the heavens, so it is the gate to heaven, and we can't abandon any part of it, no matter how weak we are, how strong they are.
Since the early Middle Ages, Islam respected the rights of Christians and Jews to worship here freely. But in modern times, that relationship has been broken. Under British and then Jordanian rule, Jewish access was severely restricted until the Israeli armies seized control of the old city in 1967. Now it's the Palestinians, trapped in their Gaza enclave and no longer free to worship here, while those from the West Bank can be held at checkpoints for hours until the opportunity for worship has passed.
Enough is enough. Enough for bloodshed, enough for killing, enough for hatred. Because we belong to the same family. We worship the same God. Even in Jerusalem here, and Hebron, and Shechem, Nablus, all these places are holy places for Muslims and non-Muslims, for Muslims and Jews.
In the West Bank city of Hebron, the tomb of Abraham, father to the Jewish and Arab nations through his sons Isaac and Ishmael. As clearly stated in the Quran, God himself chose Abraham for his friend and commanded Muhammad, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, be not divided. But Hebron is as fiercely divided as any city on earth. Abraham's tomb is on the front line between Palestinians and Jewish settlers and is guarded like a fortress.
Close it.
In order to maintain the sanctity of these places, we have to work together. We have to ask ourselves how it could be better for all of us, how we are able to rebuild the reality in a different way, far from hatred, far from bloodshed, far from war, to give the sense of security, to give the sense of trust between ourselves.
But when trust and mutual respect break down, the hard men on all sides reach into their sacred texts for the messages they need to hear. Sheikh Tafesh of Hamas was elected to represent Bethlehem and claims that nearly a third of his votes came from Christian Palestinians.
Right needs power to protect it, especially when your land and your people have been attacked. Flowers sometimes need the protection of thorns. The message of the Quran is clear. If anyone attacks you, attack him in like manner. If they kill our women, children, and elderly as they have in our cities and villages, we will retaliate in kind.
Suicide is specifically forbidden in the Quran.
That's true. God said, "Do not kill yourselves and do not bring misery upon yourself." So we are forbidden from attempting suicide. If we had the same weapons as the enemy, we would not resort to this method, but we don't, so it's our only option.
There's the paradox in the Quran. On the one hand, the consistent message that life is sacred. In verse after verse, suicide is explicitly forbidden. Destroy not yourselves. And yet, the suicide bomber is also quoting from the Koran when he says that those who die fighting in God's cause achieve martyrdom and receive their reward in paradise. Is this fighting in God's cause? And this?
When the violence spreads beyond the Palestinian struggle, 9/11, 7/7 in Britain with thousands of victims, including Muslims.
The same issue. What does America plant in the world? It is guilty of great injustices against ordinary people. It attacks them. And the same goes for Britain, which occupied many Arab and Muslim countries. In all that time, how many people did Britain murder and execute?
Here in Iran, as elsewhere in the Muslim world, the anger goes beyond Palestine, which is seen as one dark chapter in a long history of humiliation at the hands of the Christian West and its allies. These are people with a powerful narrative, which may be inaccurate and distorted, but is sustained by a real sense of injustice and vivid flashes of inherited memory. It is a lament for centuries of declining Muslim power and prestige for which the Christian West is held responsible. It speaks of a time when imperial European powers carved up the Middle East between them, imposing Western law, Western values, even Western dress. It excuses today's record of economic failure and autocratic Muslim governments with stories of oil wells stolen and of corrupt presidents and kings from the Shah of Iran to Saddam Hussein, sustained by the West against the will of their own people, and like Saddam, toppled when their usefulness had passed. And the closer they get to the present, the harsher and more painful their narrative becomes. Defeat after defeat at the hands of the West and its clients. Afghanistan and again Iraq are the latest chapters. Not seen as any kind of liberation, but as occupation and humiliation. No one makes more capital out of this narrative than the hard-line clerics of fundamentalist Islam.
All the bloodshed these days is the blood of Muslims. Chechnya is Muslim blood, Kashmir is Muslim blood, Afghanistan is Muslim blood, Bosnia and Herzegovina is Muslim blood, Palestine is Muslim blood, Cyprus is Muslim blood, Ethiopia is Muslim blood, and Somalia is Muslim blood. We almost covered the map.
And as the anger rises and the tone hardens, the voices of those to whom the Quran speaks of peace and tolerance are drowned out by those who take the contradictory message.
And we have to declare that we are the children of the Emir of Believers, Imam Ali. And wherever we are, we will stand up against the enemies of Islam. We will never surrender to these crooked people. Never. Oh God, cut off the wicked hands of America and Israel. Make America, Israel, and Britain weak.
Yet amidst all this talk against the external enemy, one awkward fact stands out. There have been many periods when more Muslims were killed by fellow Muslims than died at the hands of Christians and Jews. Iraq, 2005. Muslim against Muslim. Since the death of the Prophet nearly 1,500 years ago, two main factions within Islam, the Sunni and the Shia, have been sharply divided over who should lead the faith. Diversity of tongues and colors is, in the words of the Quran, among the wonders of God's creation. Allah has no preference for any race, tribe, or nation above another, and is no respecter of human ideas of class and status. The best in His sight is the most honorable. It is a message that gives dignity to the poorest laborer or peasant who has no need of priests or rabbis to interpret God's message because, as it says in the Quran, we have made this easy to understand in your own tongue. Any shed, field, or street corner is a suitable place to worship Him, and He is always close to you. Closer, God says in the Quran, than your jugular vein. And when you pray, you feel you're speaking directly to Him.
Prayer gives you a feeling that no one can describe. It's beyond human imagination. You feel you're in God's hands, in the hands of someone you love. You're not praying because you have to, or because you're frightened of Him. You're praying because you feel such love for Him.
Whether prayer is private or communal, the idea that everyone has a direct personal relationship with God is at the heart of the message of the Quran and Sunni Muslim belief. And the Sunnis are the majority, about 85% of the worldwide Muslim community. But the God they worship may not be described in human language, nor represented in any art form, for that would be idolatry. Yet sometimes the human heart yearns for a faith you can touch and feel, for drama, for music, for ceremony, for great stories of sacrifice, pain, martyrdom, and redemption. And for someone to pray to who has human form. Shia Islam answers these needs, and here in Iran, they're almost entirely Shia. In this holy city of Qom, a symbolic commemoration of the murder of Ali, son-in-law of the Prophet. The Shia believe that Ali and his descendants, the Imams, were chosen by God to lead the Muslim community. But down the generations, one Imam after another was murdered. The Iranian city of Mashhad, built around the magnificent shrine to Imam al-Reza, the 8th Imam, who was poisoned in the year 818. As they cross the street, people pause to honor the sacred memory of this departed saint. Shia pilgrims come to Mashhad from all over the world with gifts and donations and to pray to Imam al-Reza in the same way that Roman Catholics and Orthodox Christians pray to their saints for help, guidance, and miracles of healing.
If there's a time when your heart is broken and you bring your problems to Imam Reza, he will hear your prayer. He can unburden your heart and lift your spirits.
But the Quran makes it so clear that your prayer should only be directed to God.
When you want to reach God, you have to speak to the Imams first so that they can mediate for you. And if you do it that way, God will give you a quicker answer to your request. At least, that's how it's been explained to us.
It's sentiments like these that enrage the Sunni.
When Muslims pray at the tombs of departed saints, they are compromising this strict tenet of Islam. The Quran says clearly it's a sin, because this Imam Reza, he was a great man, but he's dead. The dead cannot help you. Only God is ever living.
I don't say that I go to Imam Reza so that he can solve my problems. I say that I have a request for God, but my position is not high enough to reach him. I put Imam Reza as the intermediary so that he, who is very dear to God, asks him to have mercy on me.
The Grand Ayatollah speaks from his private office in the heart of the Iranian city of Qom. Here especially one gets a sense of how the differences between Shia and Sunni echo the Catholic-Protestant divide. As well as the veneration of saints with its grand ayatollahs, its lesser ayatollahs, its jurist consuls and mullahs, its mosques and seminaries, the holy city of Qom is in so many respects a Shia Vatican. People come here to pay their tithes and seek answers to questions they can't resolve through their own reading of the Koran. And Grand Ayatollah Saneh is ready to receive the daily quotas of written petitions. First, a marriage problem.
This husband entered the marriage concealing the fact that he was infertile and incapable of having children. If his wife had known of his condition, the marriage would never have taken place. In view of this, can she annul the marriage and ask for a divorce?
Yes, she can annul the marriage. Infertility is not in itself an impediment to marriage, but this is a case of deception, because the marriage contract was based on the assumption of health.
The same principle applies when virginity is in question.
Yes, that's right. Am I correct, Mr. Hai?
But Mr. Hai questions whether it's fair to assume deception. In his view, the problem may only have come to light after the marriage. But the Grand Ayatollah disagrees.
He has concealed this imperfection. That's clear to me. It's a definite case of deception.
The Quran is totally against any kind of priesthood. In chapter 9, verse 31, it says quite categorically, talking about the Jews and the Christians, that one of their problems was that they'd taken their rabbis, their monks, their priests as lords besides God. We do not require intermediaries. There's no need for an intercessor. You and I have the absolute right to pray and to connect with the divine.
Sunni and Shia, both claiming a divine right to lead the Muslim community, but they are fundamentally divided in their relationship with God and the Quran. The cause of 1,500 years of bloody conflict, where the minority Shia have been the underdogs. These boys are weeping for Ali, the martyred founder of their faith, and for a long history of massacres in which the Shia have died in their thousands at the hands of the dominant Sunni. And yet, there is one important movement that rises above these divisions, embracing followers from both traditions, the Sufis. Hundreds of millions of Muslims are Sufis who believe that the Quran speaks directly to their hearts.
Quran is so simple. God didn't make it very complicated. It's your daily life stories. You don't need scholars to understand it. Look at the Indian people from India. They don't speak Arabic. Look at the Turkish people. They don't speak Arabic. The Persian, they don't speak Arabic. They memorized the Quran. As soon as they memorized and they understood it, it entered to the heart without translation.
Like the Sufis believe that their relationship with God is also direct, But above all, it is a relationship of all-consuming love.
You say Allah, it just brings you that feeling, that passion, love. You are connected with the one you love. You have to carve God's name in your heart, like you carve on stones. But you can't carve God's name on your heart by chisels and hammer. You carve it by repeating the name, always repeating the name. So when you say Allah, it has to come from the heart, deep. It's not just word comes out of the mouth.
Among the Mevlevi Sufis here in Istanbul, that passion, that love for the divine, is expressed through music and dance. It's a 700-year-old ritual heavy with symbolism. Black cloaks representing the grave, high brown caps, the tombstone. And the dance itself, quickening and quickening, a mystical journey of love deepening and the ego vanishing as the devotee comes closer and closer to the divine. There are Sufis who believe that this dance is represented in the Koran by the swirling patterns worked into so many early versions of the text, and is directly connected to the central ritual of Islam, the mass circulation around the holy Kaaba in Mecca. But the people who control Mecca today would regard every religious practice of the Mevlevi Sufis, the music, the dance, the easy, informal mixing of men and women, as abominations. The men who walk with King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia are Sunni Muslims, but they've moved a long way from the Sunni ideal of a direct personal relationship with God. Saudi Arabia has its own clerical hierarchy, and the dominant religious message here is a form of Wahhabi Islam, which represents the views of only a small minority of Muslims.
من وجدتموه يعمل عمل قوم لوط فاقتلوا الفاعل والمفعول رجلين يضربان بالسيف ثم يوضعان على نعش ويحرق النعش.
الحقيقة أن الجهاد الذي وقع في الفلوجة يرفع الرأس وتضرب رقاب وتنسف جماجم. هذا خط النصر والشهادة والتضحية.
By controlling the theological heart of Islam, as well being flushed with petrodollars, they've been able to impose their strict, rigid, narrow, sectarian, divisive interpretation of Islam on the whole Muslim community, international community. And this has been a tremendous tragedy for all of us.
The Wahhabists of Saudi Arabia nurtured the Taliban and permitted the destruction of one of the most ancient sites in the world, the magnificent Buddha statues in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was raised in the Wahhabist faith, and 15 of the 19 terrorists responsible for 9/11 were of Saudi origin.
Over the past 20 years or so, it has been argued that over $100 billion has been expended by the Saudi government in propagating their version of Islam across the world. New mosques, madrasas, Muslim teachers, imams, school textbooks, literature have all been shaped by a Wahhabi agenda.
Saudi Arabia, with its massive oil wealth, has been one of the major influences driving the Muslim world towards fundamentalism and an intolerant reading of the Quran.
One of the great tragedies of the current Islamic political landscape is that the only two states that are concerned to use their resources to promote a particular vision of Islam internationally are the Iranians and the Saudis, neither of whom represent a kind of mainstream, classical, inclusive Islam of the kind that most Muslims know and are familiar with and love.
Though the Iranian Shiites are on the opposite side of the religious divide, they have one thing in common with the Saudis: a priestly caste, contrary to the Quranic principle of a direct relationship with God.
For many centuries, during the golden ages of Islam. No one had religion as a profession. Even the scholars of religion had other professions. Today, unfortunately, there are those who have adopted religion as a profession and are making money out of religion, and they have a huge vested interest in a huge following and a large following, and will use every tool. They will use television, they will use all kinds of media and monopolize religion. This is against the essence of Islam.
One of the consequences of this transformation has been the introduction of public executions, floggings and hangings in Afghanistan and Iran, where the religious establishment has taken hold of political power. Iran now executes more people as a percentage of the population than any country on earth, even surpassing China.
How can you justify so many executions?
I believe that Islam's law of retaliation in kind for murderers is one of the most beautiful laws of the Quran. If we want to choose only one good law from the Quran, it's that one.
But it's not just murderers who are killed in this country. Homosexuals are put to death. People are executed even for possessing alcohol.
If the government decides that by killing them it can restore security, it's allowed to do so. I hope in the future this becomes law not only in the Islamic Republic of Iran, but in the entire world of Islam.
But does the Quran really justify any of this? What does it say about crime and punishment?
As for the thief, both male and female, cut off their hands. It is the reward of their own deeds, an exemplary punishment from Allah. Allah is mighty, wise. But whosoever repenteth after his wrongdoing and amendeth, Allah will relent toward him. Allah is forgiving, merciful.
The Quran stipulates that sentence cannot be carried out if the offender sincerely repents. Yet this emphasis on mercy is frequently overlooked.
The adulterer and the adulteress, scourge ye each one of them with 100 stripes. Let not pity for the twain withhold you from obedience to Allah.
And if they repent and improve, let them be. Allah is ever relenting, merciful.
And in that spirit, the Quran is absolutely clear that no one must be convicted without conclusive proof of guilt.
The main objective of the Sharia is forgiveness, is to be forgiven, is not just to judge and to kill. And then the conditions to implement the penal code are so high that all the scholars were saying from the beginning, it's quite impossible to implement them.
The crime of adultery, for example, demands that 4 witnesses testify to the sexual act. That makes it actually impossible for there to be evidentiary proof of adultery. That's why, since the inception of Islam until now, the number of times that adulterers have received the full punishment can be counted on the fingers of one hand, and the same goes for amputation. Before sentence can be carried out, every possible reason for mitigation must be considered.
This humane interpretation of Sharia law is the guiding principle on the Palestinian West Bank. Next door to the fruit market in the town of Ramallah is the very unforbidding Sharia court. The atmosphere inside is wonderfully casual. No policemen, no handcuffed prisoners, just an endless stream of people, some on official business, others just stopping by for a chat. As in most Muslim countries, there are 2 legal systems. Civil law, often a hybrid of Islamic, Napoleonic and Roman law, applied in criminal cases, and Sharia law dealing with personal and family matters. The Sharia judges adjudicate in custody disputes and divorce cases where the woman's entitlement is based on principles laid down in the Quran. The elderly have the right to appeal to the courts if they can show they're being neglected by sons and daughters who have the resources to help them. The court also has a duty to appoint guardians for orphans and the mentally impaired. Here, the judge poses a set of simple questions to test the mental competence of an elderly woman who has recently lost her son. Under Islamic law, the mother is entitled to a proportion of her son's estate if he predeceases her. But the judge decides that the old lady is not competent to handle her finances and appoints her daughter-in-law to act on her behalf. This is the law based on Quranic principles as practiced here, but quite unlike the way it's applied in some Muslim countries. If the Quran is so clear about the principles of justice, how are any differences possible? The Quran is written in a form of classical Arabic, which is often difficult even for highly educated speakers of Arabic to understand. For most Muslims, Arabic is not their first language, and no translations, it is said, can capture the full meaning of the original. As a result, the individual imam or preacher becomes the intermediary between the Quran and the message his followers receive. That message can be tailored to fit the time and place. And over the centuries, interpretations and additions have filled hundreds of thousands of volumes. There are the scholarly commentaries and the hadith, the collected sayings and deeds of the Prophet. The Islamic legal system, the Sharia, is based on the Quran and the hadith, where some of the harshest punishments are laid down. Death by stoning for adultery, which is not mentioned in the Quran.
The hadith were all compiled and collected some 250 to 350 years after the death of the Prophet. Many of them are forged or fabricated and have been called into question. Unfortunately, however, many Muslims consider the hadith to be co-equal with the Quran, but clearly that is not so. The Quran makes quite clear that it is the ultimate text. Anything else cannot be on the same level.
But even the Quran is vulnerable to change and distortion, if not in its original Arabic, certainly in translation. The King Fahd printing press in Medina, Saudi Arabia, has the capacity to publish 10 million Qurans a year in Arabic and 44 other languages. These are distributed around the world, well below cost and in some cases for free. And it's fascinating to see how the Saudi religious establishment has augmented the text. Into the verse that speaks of those who have earned God's anger and gone astray, they have inserted, in brackets, such as the Jews and such as the Christians. And into the verse calling upon the faithful to make their armaments ready against the enemies of Islam, the translator has made another insertion: tanks, planes, missiles and artillery.
What you have got are modern armaments set within the Quran itself. And interesting enough, in the introduction to this, and it is by a notable leader in Saudi, you have a justification for violent conflict, jihad, for suicide bombing, and it is stated clearly that the Quran is the perfect model for warfare.
Any suggestion of distortion in the text is highly contentious because of the special significance of the Quran in the minds of Muslims. Unlike most Christians and Jews who believe their sacred texts to be authored by men inspired by God, Muslims believe the Quran to be the word of God as dictated to the Prophet Muhammad. This distinction means that critical analysis of the sacred texts becomes an extremely sensitive issue when applied to the Quran. And the problem is compounded when some of the scholars making the attempt are Western non-Muslims. Are they really in a position to shed new light on the text and its origins? In 1972, during the restoration of the Great Mosque of Sana'a, capital of North Yemen, workers discovered a mash of old parchments in a loft between the inner and outer roofs. The entire load was stuffed into some 20 potato sacks, where it might have remained were it not for the arrival 7 years later of Dr. Geert Puin, a German scholar and Quranic expert. Puin immediately grasped the significance of the find. Working with a team of local assistants, he carefully prized the layers apart and fired off thousands of photographs. 4 fragments immediately caught Puin's attention. They contained the first and last chapters of the Quran, and unlike any other Qurans in existence, they were illustrated with architectural drawings of mosques, a vital clue to their origin.
Man kann eben diesen
Because of its drawings, because of the art historical context, you can date this Quran very precisely to the time of Al-Walid.
Sehr genau datieren auf die Zeit von Al-Walid.
This is the reign between 705 and 715.
5 und 715.
The oldest datable Quran in the world, created some 70 years after the death of the Prophet. From the potato sacks, Puin identified fragments from nearly 1,000 different Qurans. Comparisons between them and the standard Cairo text in use today are startling. These early texts are written in a kind of shorthand with no vowel markings or distinguishing dots, which means that individual words can have up to 30 different meanings.
Es ist tatsächlich so, dass man durch die schiere Existenz
The sheer existence of so many different possible readings would suggest that this text wasn't passed down word for word.
Der Text eben nicht wortwörtlich überliefert.
The text isn't as stable as it seems in the Cairo version.
In der Fassung von Kairo erscheint.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Muslim scholars today argue that the integrity of every word of the text has been perfectly preserved through the oral tradition. But the written Quran shows variation. Forensic examination of the Sana'a fragments revealed earlier texts that had been washed off and overwritten. Although the hidden text revealed no contradictory meanings, words had been changed, verses and whole chapters rearranged.
If his researches are correct, particularly on dating, it suggests, in fact, that the Quran was not a single product, a single entity that was fixed by 650, but actually developed much, much later, hence the overlaying of texts of written materials.
In 2001, Puin's conclusions were taken one dangerous step further. A book appeared written by an expert in early Semitic languages. It was so controversial that the author published under the pseudonym Christoph Luxemburg and will only speak on condition that his identity remains concealed.
Unbedingt erforderlich, den Koran neu zu lesen.
In order to understand it correctly, we need a fundamentally new interpretation and reading of the Quran.
Dr. Marcus Gross helped to translate the book from its original German into English and is willing, openly, to express the author's views.
A quarter or a fifth of the Quran contains words which have been misunderstood, or words which don't make real sense. That number can be vastly reduced with a knowledge of Syriac to, let's say, 5%.
Syriac, or Syrio-Aramaic, had become one of the dominant languages of Christian liturgy by the 3rd century. Christ spoke Aramaic, and it can still be heard in remote Christian communities like this town of Malula in Syria. But at the time of Muhammad, Syrio-Aramaic was the major written and cultural language of the whole region. Written Arabic was in its infancy.
There are pre-Islamic inscriptions in Arabic, very short texts, but the first real book written in Arabic is the Koran.
But Luxembourg is saying the Quran is written in 2 languages.
In many areas in the world, languages mix constantly, all the time. To make it understandable to a speaker of English, you have to go back about 1,000 years. Imagine the Anglo-Saxon peasant talking to his master, who was a Norman and spoke a mixed language of French and an Anglo-Saxon. And you could only understand that mixed language with a knowledge of both.
Muslim scholars of the past had the confidence to acknowledge foreign words in the Quran. In the 10th century, Al-Tabari, one of the most respected commentators, identified Hebrew, Latin, Greek, Persian, Abyssinian, and Syriac words. The difference, though, is that Luxembourg is claiming new meanings, and at a time when critical examination of the text is actively discouraged. How can one professor of linguistics challenge the collective judgment of over 1 billion people, and on what basis? What methods does he use?
Ich bin natürlich bemüht, zunächst einmal
I take into consideration the meaning of the root, of the corresponding root in Syriac, or a possible misreading. Misreading in this case means that the undotted text was dotted wrongly. Then there's also the possibility that a Syriac letter was, by mistake, written within an Arabic text.
Using these methods, Luxembourg examined some of the most obscure passages of the Quran. After Mary has given birth to Jesus, in the Arabic Quran, the archangel says to her, "Be not sad, your Lord has placed a rivulet beneath you." In Luxembourg's version, "Be not sad, your Lord has made your delivery legitimate." And there are other examples. God's command to a skeptic in Arabic, "Look at your food and drink, look at your ass," becomes "Look at your condition and look at your overall state." At the end of the world, the earth steps forward in Arabic. In Syriac, the earth splits open. But do any of these changes affect the central precepts of Islam?
It's certainly not key precepts like the existence of God or afterlife, which is challenged by my interpretation, but many everyday customs. One example is the veil. The Quranic verse adduced to prove their position talked about humur, which had to be beaten on the pockets. The sentence was a bit obscure. It's usually rendered that it means cover your head and your cleavage. And if you have a look at the chador, the veil in Iran, for example, that's exactly what is covered. But with my Syriac interpretation of the verse, my translation is, put your belt around your hips. And the belt was a sign of chastity, also especially used by monks. So that makes it much more meaningful.
It's Luxembourg's references to paradise that caused the greatest offense. In the Iranian city of Isfahan, there's a 17th century palace built to represent the gates of heaven. The cool greens of the gardens beyond express the longings of a desert people and are beautifully described in the Quran, along with flowing fountains and the favors of huris, usually understood as wide-eyed virgins. One commentary, but not the Quran, even specifies numbers, 72 for each righteous man. But that doesn't sit well with 7 verses of the Quran that promise the righteous eternal contentment with their wives. Luxembourg believes he has resolved his contradiction.
There is one passage in the Quran dealing with the Houris, in which it says, وَزَوَجْنَاهُمْ بِحُورَ عِينٍ. We have paired them with dark, wide-eyed maidens. That is the traditional understanding of this verse. If you put the dots on the undotted text a little bit differently, what comes out is, we will make you comfortable under white, crystal-clear grapes.
For the suicide bomber, then, not the prospect of 72 virgins in paradise, but a modest bunch of grapes.
German study, as far as I'm concerned, is very Christian-centric. It's influenced by the way Bible has been researched and put together. Bible and the Quran are not the same.
It's the connection with Christian symbolism that is so controversial to some. This 5th century mural in an Egyptian monastery depicts the archangels receiving souls in paradise. Each archangel holds a grape in one hand and in the other cradles the departed souls, who are refreshed with bunches of grapes. The grape motif is repeated in the vestments of the priests of the Syrian Orthodox Church, all relating back to Christ's promise to his disciples at the Last Supper that he will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until he is reunited with them in his Father's kingdom.
For us to acknowledge both a cultural, religious, and a theological heritage with Christianity over Judaism is not problematic at all. In fact, it's part of our body politic as Muslims that we must believe and accept those scriptures as being part of the whole corpus of divine revelation from the beginning of time.
Although Luxemburg's work has been called into question by leading academics and has not been independently corroborated, he believes it opens a door, encouraging linguists, archaeologists, and historians to use modern tools to throw further light on the text and its context. For some Muslim scholars, that is in the Quranic spirit of free inquiry and no threat to those who are robust in their faith.
This research by Luxemburg and his colleagues doesn't undermine any of the basic tenets, teachings, or principles of Islam. What it does, though, is to provide interesting questions. And we, as thinking Muslims, as people of the 21st century, that we should say, yes, let's look at what he's providing. And let's not just condemn, but let's also see if this research has a historical base, or is it a product of European Orientalism.
The Quran has brought comfort and peace to countless millions. It has given the humblest peasant and laborer a sense of worth and dignity rarely equaled in any other civilization. It has taught people of different races to live in brotherhood and people of different creeds to live side by side in reasonable harmony. It has inspired a great civilization in which Muslims live creative and useful lives and which, by its achievements, enrich the whole world. But when Muslims feel marginalized and threatened, this dignity and courtesy can give way to an explosive mixture of rage and hatred, impelling spokesmen for a great spiritual and ethical religion to seek approval in the Quran for violent confrontation. And this at a time when more Muslims are probably reading and hearing the Quran than in all of previous history. Electronically sophisticated believers can even access the text in its original Arabic or in translation through the new generation of electronic Qurans. But modern technology has also given tremendous power and scope to those determined to impose their own interpretations on the Quran.
We Muslims have been ordered to do brainwashing.
Scores of satellite channels compete for the attention of Muslims across the world.
Equality of women is a bunch of foolishness.
The summit of Islam is jihad.
Now, of course, the latest technology is the internet, which is a very important platform for the spread of sort of fundamentalist types of religion. It's depressing to see how profoundly a religion's temper can be shaped simply by purely technological developments, but that is one of the things that's happening at the moment.
The internet has become the chosen forum of radicals and extremists. On this site, Mohammed Siddiq Khan posts his own obituary prior to the 7/7 London bombing, where he played the key role.
We are at war and I'm a soldier. Now you too will taste the reality of this situation.
The full effect of all this propaganda can only be guessed at. But certainly some men and women have changed the way they believe they should live their lives according to the Koran, and in a very short time, turning a great city like Cairo into a place that would be unrecognizable to anyone returning here after an absence of only 30 years.
Up until 1974, I had not seen a single veiled woman.
If the veil is worn, it must cover the face and hide the beauty.
But it's not just a question of interpretation. Sometimes there's a selective reading of the text, ignoring, for instance, the firm injunction to forgive any wrongdoer who sincerely repents. Or claiming approval for ancient cultural practices that have no basis in the Quran.
It is an African cultural practice. It harms a female body. It's mutilating a female body. Not allowed.
But there are verses, particularly those referring to women, which are controversial. Yet for every reference that seems to suggest their inferior status, there are others calling for mutual respect and equality.
The Quran honors women. The Quran dignifies women. I feel that as a woman every day.
And that's the paradox and the challenge of the Quran.
The Quran has two audiences. It has an immediate 7th century patriarchal tribal audience. Then it has the ultimate audience, you and I of this generation, of this age, and whoever comes in the future. So it talks two languages for two sets of people.
We have to make changes from time to time, not in the Quran itself, because it's static, but in the way we try to understand, in the way we try to interpret this book.
The Quran is constantly enjoining us to reflect, to question, to understand, to use our mental faculties, to use our heart and understanding.
The Quran is telling you, go and look and study and understand and try to change for the better. You are here as reformists. You have to reform yourself, your heart, and the world for the better. This is the way the Quran should be in your life, a companion, a light, and helping you to be creative.
Over 1 billion people cherish the Quran as the authentic word of God, his final message. How Muslims interpret that message will affect the future of Islam and all mankind.